Oh, we still have another long one. Darn it, I was hoping we were done with the long ones. We got one more long one, and then we're done with the long ones. Now, these ones, notice the denominator has that squared term in it. So our first step is to make it look like our previous problems by factoring. We're going to factor the bottom out. The bottom is going to factor here, u and a u. Since the end is positive, they both have to be the same as the middle, a minus and a minus. Factors of 4 that add up to 5, 4, and 1. So you'll notice when we factored that, we have the u minus 4 that's underneath that other fraction, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to multiply by our common denominator. Our common denominator is going to be the u minus 4 and the u minus 1. We don't need the u minus 4 twice because we already have it. We just need it that one time. So when we cancel, on the first fraction, both of them are going to cancel out. The u minus 4 is going to cancel, the u minus 1 is going to cancel. I'm just going to get the minus 40. That's on top of that fraction. On the second one, just the u minus 4 is going to cancel out. So I'm going to have negative 2u times u minus 1. Okay? So we got to get rid of those parentheses, use our distributive property. Negative 40 is going to equal negative 2u times u would be negative 2u squared. Negative 2u times a negative 1 is a positive 2u. We've got the squared term in there. We know that we have to have it equal to 0, and it's not equal to 0. So if we make this equal to 0, we would move this over to this side, right? And then we look and we say, oh, but our u squared is negative, and we don't want our u squared to be negative. So if that happens, we end up moving everything back over so that we get a positive 2u squared. Remember doing that before?
Yeah.
So we make this 2u squared minus 2u minus 40 equals 0. Now, we could go ahead and try to factor it from there, but on these ones, if you recognize that all 3 of those are divisible by 2, we can make the problem a lot easier to factor. So I say, oh, I'm going to divide all of these by 2, and I end up dividing the 0 by 2, which doesn't change a whole lot. But when I divide by 2, 2u squared divided by 2 is just a plain u squared. Negative 2u divided by 2 is negative u. Negative 40 divided by 2 is minus 20. And 0 divided by 2 is still 0. That looks a whole lot easier to factor than that with the 40 in it, right?
Yeah.
So now we can do our 2 sets of parentheses. A u and a u. My signs, negative and a positive, since the end is negative. Factors of 20.
5 and 4.
5 and 4. We want to put them in the right order so that we get a minus 1u in the middle. And so we would have to have
The 5.
a minus 5 and a plus 4. Now we can break it down into our 2 smaller problems. U minus 5 equals 0 or u plus 4 equals 0. And we have to solve each of those. So when we solve the first one, we plus our 5. And when we solve the second one, we minus our 4. So u could equal 5 or negative 4. Now, just like all the other ones, if we have a nice whole number answer, we've got to go check. Can we have both of those answers, or do we have to get rid of them? Either of them. Do either of them give me 0 on the bottom?
Yep, they do.
They do. Which one gives me 0?
Oh, well, I thought maybe 5u plus the 4, then you would...
You plug them in here. So 5 minus 4 is 1. 5 minus 1 is 4. Those are both okay.
Okay.
If I put in a -4, -4 minus 4 is -8. -4 minus 1 is -5. That's okay. We couldn't have had a +4 or a +1. Those would give us zeros in there. So they're both okay. They check out. We can have both those answers. All right. All right, number 8, had a typo on there. Make sure that it has a +15 on the end. If you have an old set of papers, it might have the wrong number there, but it should have a +15 on the bottom. And so again, if we're solving this one, we're going to factor our quadratic expression so that we can find what our common denominator is. So we need to start out by factoring the denominator of that first fraction, x and x. My signs, since the end is positive, both will be the same as the middle, a negative and a negative. Factors of 15 that add up to the 8 in the middle. If I have a -5 and a -3, and I wrote it at 5, a -5 and a -3, it adds up to the -8 in the middle. So our common denominator is going to be the x minus 5 and the x minus 3. One of them should be in common with whatever you have on that other fraction. So if I multiply by x minus 5 and x minus 3, on the first fraction, both the x minus 5 and the x minus 3 will cancel out. I just have an 8. Always be careful to watch if there's a negative in front. There's not on this one, so I just get my 8. Equals, on the other side, the x minus 3 cancels out, so I'm going to get the -2x times my x minus 5. I then have to get rid of my parentheses, so I'm going to go ahead and use my distributive property. 8 is equal to -2x squared plus 10x. Negative times a negative gives me a positive. Again, we're working with that quadratic expression. We need it set equal to 0. If you happen to notice that this is negative, you'll want to move these things over here to make it positive. You can move your 8 over, but then you still have the -2x squared, and you want your x squared always to be positive, so you'd end up still having to move them all over and make them the opposite sign. So it's shorter if we just move these two over here, and so this is then going to become a +2x squared. This will become a -10x, and that will stay 8 plus 8 equals 0. Now, a nice little trick you can do on this one, instead of trying to go ahead and factor right away, is if you notice all of these terms are divisible by 2, you can simplify your expression. So I could go ahead and divide by 2 as my next step instead of trying to factor. It's just a little shortcut, makes your factoring easier. 2x squared divided by 2 is x squared. -10 divided by 2 would give me -5x. +8 divided by 2 is +4. And of course, 0 divided by 2 is still going to be 0. Now that looks a whole lot easier to factor than the 2x squared minus 10x plus 8. Not that this wouldn't work. It's just that this is easier. Factors of x squared, x and x. Since my end is positive, both are the same as the middle, a negative and a negative. Factors of 4 that add up to 5. -4 and a -1 are the -5 in the middle. I can then set each of those factors equal to 0. So x minus 4 equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0. Solving those, I just need to move my number to the opposite sides by doing the opposites. So I'm going to plus my 4 and plus my 1. X either equals 4 or 1. Again, we always have to check our fractions to make sure we don't get 0 in the bottom of the fraction. 4 minus 5 is -1. 4 minus 3 is +1. 1 minus 5 is -4. 1 minus 3 is -2. Both of those are okay. I couldn't have 5. 5 minus 5 is 0. Or 3. 3 minus 3 is 0. I don't have a 5 or a 3, so both of my answers are good. So x equals 4 or 1. Okay, number 9. We're going to factor the one with the squared first. So how's that one going to factor?
W minus, oh, W and a W.
If the
Well,
end
see that,
is
it can be
positive,
five
then they're both the same as the middle, right?
So 11 or 18?
No, we got to do our signs.
Oh, minus and positive.
No,
Both positive.
no,
Both negative?
they're both negative. If the end is positive, both signs have to be the same as the middle.
Okay.
A negative times a negative gives me a positive, but a negative plus a negative stays negative. So now I need the factors of 18 that are going to add up to the 11 in the middle.
18. I could only think of 6 and 3.
6 and 3 only add up to 9,
Oh, we're adding.
right? The factors
Oh.
that add up to the middle.
Add up to the middle.
So what else
5
is
and 6.
factors of 18?
Oh.
5 and 6 do add up to the
9.
11, but don't give us the 18.
9 and 9.
9 times
2.
2. Hey, 9 times 2 is 18, but add up to 11, right?
Yep.
Ah. So notice, they have this in common, right? That should happen. That they have one of them in common with that other fraction over there. So now we know what our common denominator should be. W minus 9 and W minus 2. What's going to happen?
Okay, the first one, we are going to cancel off the W2, and the W2 is going to cancel, so it's going to be W minus 9. Oh, should we cancel out first, everything, or?
Let's do this side. We cancel off the W minus 2, so we're going to have
2W.
times the 2W. On the other side,
Is going to equal make, oh, they're going to cancel out.
everything's going to cancel out but the top, right?
Yep.
So we get minus 28. Getting rid of the parentheses, what are we going to get?
We are going to get 2W
2W
squared
squared
minus 18W.
minus 18W equals negative 28. So we know we're working with a squared term. We have to have it equal to 0. It's not equal to 0, so what do we need to do?
We need to move everything to the right.
Now we could move everything to the right, but what would happen with our W squared term? It would become negative
Oh,
2,
yeah.
right? So we
So
don't want to
move it
move
to the
that.
left.
We just want to move them to the left. So we're just going to plus our 28. So 2W squared minus 18W plus 28 equals 0. So if that's a positive, leave it where it is. Now, what do you notice about all of those coefficients? They're all divisible by,
8.
they are
2.
2. We're going to divide them all by 2 to make our problem simpler. So if I divide them by 2, I'm going to get,
You're going to get 1W.
so W squared, right?
W squared minus 9
Minus 9W
plus 14.
plus 14 equals 0. Now we can factor.
Okay, W and a W.
W and a W.
And we are going to be positive and negative.
No. What's the rule?
Well, the
If
last
the end
time
is
was-
positive,
It's going to be negative.
both are negative. A negative times a negative is still positive on the end, but adds up to the negative in the middle. factors of 14 that are going to add up to our 9.
7 times 2.
7 and 2. So W minus 7 might equal 0, or W minus 2 might equal 0. So solving those, we would
Divide.
not divide. We divide if there's a number in front of the W. If I got a minus 7, what do?
You just put, move it over.
Plus the 7, right?
Yeah, plus 7.
And plus the 2. So W could equal 7 or 2. Then we got to check, because they're nice whole number answers. Do either of those give me 0 when I put them in the bottom of the fraction?
Do they?
Do they? If I put a
Well,
7,
yeah.
7 minus 2 is 5, 7 minus 9 is negative 2. But what happens when I put the 2 in there? 2 minus 2 is 0. I can't have the 2 then, because that's going to give me 0 on the bottom of that fraction. So I'm only going to have one answer. W is going to equal 7. I can't have a 2 and I can't have a 9, because 9 minus 9 would have been 0.